causing that noise?
No, I do not know.
Okay. Well, it's only coming through the second.
Okay.
Let's make sure this is off of that. Notes will pop up. All of that. Okay. All right, good. So let's take a look. So Journal of Philosophy, Psychology, and Scientific Methods has an essay by William James written in 1910, a suggestion about mysticism. Much interest in the subject of religious mysticism has been shown in philosophic circles of late years. Most of the writings I have seen have treated the subject from the outside, for I know of no one who has spoken of having the direct authority of experience in favor of his views. I also am an outsider. And very likely, what I say will prove the fact loudly enough to readers who possibly may stand within the pale. Nevertheless, since between outsiders one is as good as another, I will not leave my suggestion unexpressed. The suggestion, stated very briefly, is that states of mystical intuition may be only very sudden and great extensions of the ordinary, quote, field of consciousness. Concerning the causes of such extensions, I have no suggestion to make, but the extension itself would, if my view be correct, consist in an immense spreading of the margin of the field, so that knowledge ordinarily transmarginal would become included and the ordinary margin would grow more central. Fechner's wave scheme will diagrammatize the alteration as I conceive it. If we suppose that the wave of present awareness, steep above the horizontal line that represents the plane of the usual threshold, slopes away below it very gradually in all directions, a fall of the threshold, however caused, would under these circumstances produce the state of things which we see on an unusually flat shore at the ebb of a spring tide. Vast tracts usually covered are then revealed to view, but nothing rises more than a few inches above the water's bed, and great parts of the scene are submerged again whenever a wave washes over them. Some persons have naturally a very wide, other a very narrow field of consciousness. The narrow field may be represented by an unusually steep form of the wave. When by accident the threshold lowers, in persons of this type, I speak here from direct personal experience, so that the field widens and the relations of its center to matters usually subliminal come into view, the larger panorama perceived fills the mind with exhilaration and sense of mental power. It is a refreshing experience, and such is now my hypothesis. We only have to suppose it to occur in an exceptionally extensive form to give us a mystical paroxysm, if such a term be allowed. A few remarks about the field of consciousness may be needed to give more definiteness to my hypothesis. The field is composed at all times of a mass of present sensation in a cloud of memories, emotions, concepts, etc. Yet these ingredients, which have to be named separately, are not separate, as the conscious field contains them. Its form is that of a much at once, in the unity of which the sensations, memories, concepts, impulses, etc. coalesce and are dissolved. The present field, as a whole, came continuously out of its predecessor and will melt into its successor as continuously again. One sensation mass passing into another sensation mass and giving the character of a gradual changing present to the experience. While the memories and concepts carry time coefficients which place whatever is present in a temporal perspective more or less vast. When now the threshold falls, What comes into view is not the next mass of sensation, for sensation requires new physical stimulations to produce it, and no alteration of a purely mental threshold can create these. Only in case the physical stimuli were already at work subliminally, preparing the next sensation, would whatever subsensation was already prepared reveal itself when the threshold fell off. But with the memories, concepts, and connotation states, the case is different. Nobody knows exactexactly how far we are marginally, quote unquote, conscious of these at ordinary times, or how far beyond the margin of our present thought trans-marginal consciousness of them may exist. There is, at any rate, no definite bound set between what is central and what is marginal in consciousness, and the margin itself has no definite bound. It is like the field of vision, which the slightest movement of the eye will extend, revealing objects that always stood there to be known. My hypothesis is that a movement of the threshold downwards will similarly bring a mass of subconscious memories, conceptions, emotional feelings, and perceptions of relation, etc., into view all at once. And that if this enlargement of the nimbus that surrounds the sensational present is vast enough, while no one of the times it contains attracts our attention singly, we shall have the conditions fulfilled for a kind of consciousness in all essential respects, like that termed mystical. So let's pause for a moment. All right. So imagine you're on the ocean and there's this big swelling wave that's coming up near your boat, and all you see when you look out from your boat is the water of the wave. You don't see anything beyond maybe 100 yards in front of you. But if that wave subsides and descends downward, suddenly you can see 1,000 miles in all directions, right? So what he's suggesting is that just like he's had revelatory moments that are maybe on a lesser scale than what these mystics are talking about, where he says, suddenly my mind became aware of the sort of vast extension of things that are all interconnected, but that normally I'm not able to see when I have a moment of maybe scientific or philosophic revelation, that it seems to him that the way the mystics are describing, and he says, as an outsider, it seems to me that what they're describing is a moment where something like that is happening to them. And then he says, what would make this make sense is if, how should we put this? What you're becoming aware of in your mystical experience when you suddenly sort of feel at one with the universe, and you feel that all is one, and you sort of see the beginning and the end of time, and all of these ways that the mystics describe what this sort of an experience might be like, is that you're connecting to things that already were connected to you. You just weren't aware of their connection, right? So the rest of the ocean is a part of why that wave is in front of you, and all you see is that one wave. But when the wave subsides, you now can see the entire structure of the whole thing all at once. And that he reports that similar experiences on a non-mystical, because he's claiming to be an outsider here, but on other scales, maybe lesser scales, but in other realms of philosophy or science or whatever he's alluding to there, those moments of sort of a transcendental revelation kind of a thing. A revelatory moment is a sublime and wonderful experience. And he says, I'm just suggesting that maybe that's what these mystics are accomplishing. I'm not sure how they're accomplishing it, but it sure seems to me like they're describing something like that. And that would make sense because, if it worked that way, and he's not sure it does, but he's suggesting it might, but if it did work that way, it would make sense that the subtle things that you maybe aren't aware of exactly how they connect with you about the rest of the universe, when suddenly you have this new perspective where you can see it all at once, it would make sense that you would be seeing things that to which you are already connected, but you were just unaware of that connection. Okay, so let's move on and see what else he has to say. It's just a theory he has about what mysticism might be. And again, it's from, oh, shoot, I hit a button here. Hold on. Again, it's from the outside, according to his claim, at least, or however much he's going to claim today. All right, sorry, let me get to the right page again because it disappeared on me. Okay. Let's finish. It's a very short essay. Let's finish this. It will be transient. Is that where we left off? Vast enough, the items contain attracts our attention singly. It will be transient if change of threshold is transient. It will be of reality, enlargement, and illumination, possibly rapturously so. It will be of unification, for the present coalesce in it with ranges of the remote quite out of its reach under ordinary circumstances, and the sense of relation will be greatly enhanced. Its form will be intuitive and perceptual, not conceptual, right? For the remembered or conceived objects in the enlarged field are supposed not to attract that attention singly, but only to give the sense of a tremendous muchness suddenly revealed. If they attracted attention separately, we should have the ordinary steep wave consciousness, and the mystical character would depart. Such is my suggestion. Persons who know something of mystical experience will no doubt find in it much to criticize. If any such shall do so with definiteness, it will have amply served its purpose of helping our understanding of mystical states to become more precise. So obviously, it's just saying, look, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to get the conversation rolling. Here's a bad first idea. See what you think about it and tell me definitively why it's wrong, and then we'll really be getting somewhere. Okay. The notion I have tried at such expense of metaphor to set forth was originally suggested to me by certain experiences of my own, which could only be described as very sudden and incomprehensible enlargements of the conscious field, bringing with them a curious sense of cognition of real fact. All have occurred within the past 5 years. 3 of them were similar in type. The 4th was unique. In each of these 3 like cases, the experience broke in abruptly upon a perfectly commonplace situation and lasted perhaps less than 2 minutes. In one instance, I was engaged in conversation, but I doubt whether the interlocutor noticed my abstraction. What happened each time was that I seemed all at once to be reminded of a past experience, and this reminiscence, ere I could conceive or name it distinctly, developed into something further that belonged with it. This, in turn, into something further still, and so on until the process faded out, leaving me amazed at the sudden vision of increasing ranges of distant fact, of which I could give no articulate account. The mode of consciousness was perceptual, not conceptual. The field expanding so fast that there seemed no time for conception or identification to get in its work. There was a strongly exciting sense that my knowledge of past or present reality was enlarging pulse by pulse, but so rapidly that my intellectual process could not keep up the pace. The content was thus entirely lost to retrospection. All right, so this is interesting because he's trying to say perhaps this is a quasi-mystical experience, and this is what made me have this suggestion that maybe this is how it works. And he keeps saying that the content is the mode of consciousness is perceptual, not conceptual. So it's not about concepts and ideas. It's about being able to see connections in a sort of way that you might not be able to fully articulate. And then he doubles down on that when he says, well, the flip side of that coin is that the content of these ideas was thus entirely lost to retrospection. Even you hear people who talk about mystical experiences, whether they get them through philosophical endeavors, which we've talked about. There are some people, and this is not something I've ever done, but there's some people who talk about psychedelic experiences. And the way they talk about it, if you go listen to Joe Rogan, he'll interview people and talk about this sometimes. And the way they talk about it is like, I felt like I had it all figured out, but as soon as I started to get back into the realm of words again, and we remember Rumi having a poem where he says, at the end of this experience, I wonder, why did I ever try to use words in the first place? Is as soon as I try to use words in retrospection to put into words what it was that I could see, whatever I was going to say was wrong. It was an approximation. It wasn't really the thing that I had come to understand. And so it's very much like that Socratic thing we talked about, where he wants to relate to the arche, the source of truth, knowledge, justice, beauty, and goodness. He wants to not know about it and know propositional statements that are crafted correctly that would describe it accurately. He wants to relate to it so that he orients himself and his character evolves, and it's a relational kind of knowledge. And that's exactly what William James is talking about here. So, and that's why he says the content was thus entirely lost even to retrospection. It sank into the limbo into which dreams vanish as we gradually awake. The feeling, I won't call it belief, that I had had a sudden opening, had seen through a window, as it were, distant realities that incomprehensibly belonged with my own life, was so acute that I cannot shake it off today. All right, so it's important to know what he's claiming and what he's not claiming here as well. This is, hold on a second. If you were in our other philosophy class where we just finished reading William James, there's a heck of a lot of respect for the intellectual seriousness of a gentleman like himself. And so he's telling what it seems like to him. He's not saying, oh, so therefore I really had this experience, or this is what the experience actually means, or anything like that. He's not trying to make claims that he wouldn't be able to defend, but at the same time, he's not doing what the scientismist types do on the other side, where they say, oh, well, since it's not something that we can totally defend, let's just blind ourselves to the fact that it happens at all and pretend it doesn't happen. He's willing to go out into the speculative areas and speak in an intellectually defensible and respectable way about things that he can barely put into words, and to try to hope that that would be the beginning of a conversation where we could figure out more about it. So that's what he's doing. It's interesting to watch him do that. Okay, we're almost done. This conviction of fact revealed, together with the perceptual form of the experience and the inability to make articulate report, are all characters of mystical states, right? That's exactly the way the mystics talk. That's how Rumi's been talking, and actually what he's been trying to induce within us when we read his poems, or give us a path or a conduit to find. The point of difference is that, in my case, certain special directions only in the field of reality seemed to get suddenly uncovered. Whereas in classical mystical experiences, it appears rather as if the whole of reality were uncovered at once. Uncovering of some sort is the essence of the phenomenon, at any rate, and is what, in the language of the Fechnerian wave metaphor, I have used the expression fall of the threshold to denote. My fourth experience of uncovering had to do with dreams. I was suddenly intromitted into the cognizance of a pair of dreams that I could not remember myself to have had, yet they seemed somehow to connect with me. I despair of giving the reader any just idea of the bewildering confusion of mind into which I was thrown by this, the most intensely peculiar experience of my whole life. I wrote a full memorandum of it a couple of days after it happened, and appended some reflections. Even though it should cast no light on the conditions of mysticism, it seems as if this record might be worthy of publication, simply as a contribution to the descriptive literature of pathological mental states. I let it follow, therefore, as originally written, with only a few words altered to make the account more clear. San Francisco, February 14th, 1906. The night before last, in my bed at Stanford University, I woke at about 7:30 a.m. from a quiet dream of some sort, and whilst gathering my waking wits, seemed suddenly to get mixed up with reminiscences of a dream of an entirely different sort, which seemed to telescope, as it were, into the first one, a dream very elaborate of lions and tragic. I concluded this to have been a previous dream of the same sleep, but the apparent mingling of two dreams was something very queer, which I had never before experienced. On the following night, February 12th and through 13th, I awoke suddenly from my first sleep, which appeared to have been very heavy, in the middle of a dream, in thinking of which I became suddenly confused by the contents of two other dreams that shuffled themselves abruptly in between the parts of the first dream, and of which I couldn't grasp the origin. Whence come these dreams, I asked. They were close to me and fresh, as if I had just dreamed them, and yet they were far away from the first dream. The contents of the three had absolutely no connection. One had a Cockney atmosphere. It had happened to someone in London. The other two were American. One involved the trying on of a coat. Was this the dream I seemed to wake from? The other was a sort of nightmare and had to do with soldiers. Each had a wholly distinct emotional atmosphere that made its individuality discontinuous with that of the others. And yet, in a moment, as these three dreams alternately telescoped into and out of each other, and I seemed to myself to have been their common dreamer, They seemed quite as distinctly not to have been dreamed in succession in that one sleep. When, then? Not on a previous night either. When, then? And which was the one out of which I had just awakened? I could no longer tell. One was as close to me as the others, and yet they entirely repelled each other, and I seemed thus to belong to three different dream systems at once, no one of which would connect itself either with the others or with my waking life. I began to feel curiously confused and scared, and tried to wake myself up wider, but I seemed already wide awake. Presently, cold shivers of dread ran over me. Am I getting into other people's dreams? Is this a telepathic experience? Or an invasion of double or treble personality? Or is it a thrombus in a cortical artery and the beginning of a general mental confusion and disorientation which is going to develop who knows how far? Decidedly, I was losing hold of myself and making acquaintance with a quality of mental distress that I had never known before. Its nearest analog being the sinking, giddying anxiety that one may have when, in the woods, one discovers that one is really lost. Most human troubles look towards a terminus. Most fears point in a direction and concentrate towards a climax. Most assaults of the evil one may be met by bracing oneself against something, one's principles, one's courage, one's will, one's pride. But in this experience, all was diffusion from a center and foothold swept away. The brace itself disintegrating all the faster as one needed its support more direly. Meanwhile, vivid perception or remembrance of the various dreams kept coming over me in alternation. Whose? 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 Unless I can attach them, I am swept out to sea with no horizon and no bond, getting lost. The idea aroused the creeps again, and with it the fear of again falling asleep and renewing the process. It had begun the previous night, but then the confusion had only gone one step and had seemed simply curious. This was the second step. Where might I be after a third step had been taken? My teeth chattered at the thought. At the same time, I found myself filled with a new pity towards persons passing into dementia, with Verwertheit. I'm sure I did not pronounce that German, I assume, word correctly, but it has to do with that feelings, or into invasions of secondary personality. We regard them as simply curious, but what they want in the awful drift of their being out of its customary self is any principle of steadiness to hold on to. We ought to assure them and reassure them that we will stand by them and recognize the true self in them to the end. We ought to let them know that we are with them and not, as too often we must seem to them, a part of the world that but confirms and publishes their deliquescence. Evidently, I was in full possession of my reflective wits, and whenever I thus objectively thought of the situation in which I was, my anxieties ceased. But there was a tendency to relapse into the dreams and reminiscences, and to relapse vividly, and then the confusion recommenced, along with the emotion of dread, lest it should develop further. Then I looked at my watch. 12:30, midnight, therefore. And this gave me another reflective idea. Habitually, on going to bed, I fall into a very deep slumber from which I never naturally awaken until after 2. I never awaken, therefore, from a midnight dream, as I did tonight. So of midnight dreams, my ordinary consciousness retains no recollection. My sleep seemed terribly heavy as I woke tonight. Dream states carry dream memories. Why may not the two succeedinous dreams, whichever two of the three were succeedinous, be memories of 12 o'clock dreams of previous nights, swept in along with the just fading dream into the just waking system of memory? Why, in short, May I not be tapping, in a way precluded by my ordinary habit of life, the midnight stratum of my past experiences? This idea gave great relief. I felt now as if I were in full possession of my anima rationalis. I turned on my light, resolving to read myself to sleep. But I didn't read. I felt drowsy instead. And putting out the light soon was in the arms of Morpheus. I woke again 2 or 3 times before daybreak with no dream experiences, and finally, with a curious but not alarming confusion between 2 dreams similar to that which I had had the previous morning, I awoke to a new day at 7. Nothing peculiar happened the following night, so the thing seems destined not to develop any further. The distressing confusion of mind in this experience was the exact opposite of mystical illumination, and equally unmystical was the definiteness of what was perceived. But the exaltation of the sense of relation was mystical. The perplexity all revolved about the fact that the 3 dreams both did and did not belong in the most intimate way together, and the sense that reality was being uncovered was mystical in the highest degree. To this day, I feel that those extra dreams were dreamed in reality. But when, where, and by whom, I cannot guess. In the open court for December 1909, Mr. Frederick Hall narrates a fit of ether mysticism, which agrees with my formula very well. When one of his doctors made a remark to the other, he chuckled, for he realized that his friends, quote, believed they saw real things and causes, but they didn't. And I did. I was where the causes were. And to see them required no more mental ability than to recognize a color as blue. The knowledge of how little the doctors actually did see, coupled with their evident feeling that they saw all there was funny to the last degree. They knew as little of the real causes as does the child who, viewing a passing train and noting its revolving wheels, supposes that they, turning of themselves, give the coaches and locomotive their momentum. Or imagine a man seated in a boat surrounded by dense fog, and out of the fog, seeing a flat stone leap from the crest of one wave to another. If he had always sat thus, his explanations must be very crude as compared with those of a man whose eyes could pierce fog and who saw upon the shore the boy skipping stones. In some such way, the remarks of the 2 physicians seemed to me like the last 2 skips of a stone thrown from my side. All that was essential in the remark I knew before it was made. Thus, to discover convincingly and for myself that the things which are unseen are those of real importance, this was sufficiently stimulating, unquote. It is evident that Mr. Hall's marginal field got enormously enlarged by the ether, yet so little defined as to its particulars, that what he perceived was mainly the thoroughgoing causal integration of its whole content. That this perception brought with it a tremendous feeling of importance and superiority is a matter of course. I have treated the phenomenon under discussion as if it consisted in the uncovering of tracks of consciousness. Is the consciousness really there waiting to be uncovered? And is it a vertical revelation of reality? These are questions on which I do not touch. In the subjects of the experience, the, quote, emotion of conviction, unquote, is always strong and sometimes absolute. The ordinary psychologist disposes of the phenomenon under the conveniently, quote unquote, scientific head of a petit mal, if not of bosh or rubbish. But we know so little of the noetic value of abnormal mental states of any kind that, in my own opinion, we had better keep an open mind and collect facts sympathetically for a long time to come. We shall not understand these alterations of consciousness either in this generation or in the next. William James, Harvard University. So that's the end of the essay. It's a very interesting, that's in 1910, William James wrote to try to get the conversation going in academia and in intellectual circles about what the heck this mysticism experience as described by mystics from the inside to start talking about it from the outside and see what level of understanding we can have of it. So I'm going to shut up there. Thank you for letting me read that. That was quite fun. And we'll open it up to any discussion. And hold on just a second. It is... Okay, we have time. So we'll open it up to discussion, and then what we'll do is we will move on with what we normally do in these classes. And Roger has curated some Rumi poems for us, and we will read through at least 5 of them, maybe more. So I can't add people as speaker because I'm not co-host.
Thanks, Zara, for reading that. I really enjoyed the essay, particularly the William James' contact with states of altered consciousness. In his case, I was actually wondering how he had experienced mystical experiences. It turns out he was either experiencing them by daydreaming, as I've understood when he was even in conversation with someone, or actually when he was getting in and out of dreams. And it's really interesting how he describes a possibility of either remembering several dreams, one from the current night and others from previous nights, or maybe his consciousness was delving into more than one dream at the same time, which seems something that people from the Brahmanic tradition from India might interpret as, okay, so people have their distinct individual souls, and these souls might be connected to a mega soul of the cosmos. And when we interpret that people are separate, they are only separate in a very illusory kind of way. In fact, the essences of every single individual are connected. It's only the material, superficial aspect of being that is giving the illusion of separateness. And so maybe his altered states of consciousness allowed him to see a bit, to kind of unveil a bit or pierce the veil very superficially of this mega soul that is connecting different people, either people that are currently alive or even people that might have been alive in the past, or people that will be alive in the future. So maybe when this connection is made, maybe even temporal conceptions don't work the same. There's this concept that cognition is time, and when we think, we are experiencing the passage of time. And maybe if we experience altered states of consciousness, we are no longer thinking and we are accessing a reality where things that are not possible with normal cognition in normal states of consciousness become possible. So yeah, I thought it really interesting, and I reiterate your invitation for other people to chime in.
Time shifts definitely go along with this for sure, and we see that in some of our consummate thinkers course. Some of the philosophers talking about a mystical type of an experience that we looked at. I mean, they're often describing journeys into the future and the past as if, of course, I'm doing that right now. I don't know how it's happening, but that's where my consciousness is, and it's a pretty bizarre thing the way they talk about it. Now, I think it's important to remember that William James is maybe tongue-in-cheek, maybe ironically, maybe with a nudge and a wink, but maybe just genuinely and straightforwardly and seriously trying to tell us this experience I'm describing is not a mystical revelation. This is just my insight into what that must be like, because I, instead of having a glorious revelation of understanding, like Roger says, the interconnectedness of all things, instead I woke up and thought I was losing my mind. In other words, it's more like he's saying I got thrown out of my bed into the middle of a bunch of waves in the ocean, and I had no idea if I would drown or not. And I started to think, wait a minute, maybe where there's not this solid ground where the propositions are described and we understand what we're relying on. Maybe it's out there that somehow these mystics have a sort of a privileged place to stand where they can see very clearly in all directions, just briefly. And boy, how hard that would be to put into words. I couldn't even put into words the fears I was having that I was losing my mind when I couldn't even comprehend which dream I was remembering. I don't know if anybody here's had those experiences, but I've certainly had those experiences more recently. I think if you get through the consummate thinkers course and you do it really seriously, you're going to have those experiences, especially when we look at Descartes, who is doing mysticism as well as philosophy. Um, it's it's no joke. You really do deconstruct and rebuild again your entire being if you go through that sort of a death and rebirth. And Nietzsche's Zarathustra talked about that explicitly in the triplet of the songs, the grave song. Anyway, we won't have to talk about philosophers anymore. We are going to get to other mystics after Rumi, but right now we're on Rumi. So I can't add people as speakers. So if you can do that, send an invite to that. If anybody else wants to talk about William James and what we read, that's great. Otherwise, we'll go into our favorite time, which is the poems.
Okay, I've invited our esteemed guest, and I'll start with a few shorter poems so that there are more intervals and people can stop me and chime in.
I forgot to do this earlier. Let me. We're still playing with tech issues every week that we do this. Let me leave my cell phone Twitter space and join as a speaker on X now, because apparently you can do that on your desktop. So I will leave here and let's see what happens.
Okay. So I see you now, and I will invite you as a speaker. Even I think you now are finally as a speaker. Try speaking. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay, let's do this. I also want to add regarding William James that I value very much his intellectual honesty and kind of going to pains to describe limitations of relaying and also investigating such a subject, and also having the boldness to do so in an academia that was probably not taking things like this seriously at all. And since then, as we can see, this discussion didn't develop, unfortunately, even though there are tons. Yeah, go ahead. It Yeah, sure. Let's delve into the poems, and then we'll see how the conversation progresses with more experiential, let's say, substance. Okay. The first one is called Dance. A really nice warm-up poem. Dance. Dance when you're broken open. Dance when you've torn the bandage off. Dance in the middle of fighting. Dance in your blood. Dance when you're perfectly free. And funnily enough, even black holes, if they dance, then they dance really hardly. They can stop being black holes. They can their event horizon might even disappear if we make a black hole rotate too much. There's an ongoing discussion on physics in physics regarding the dance of black holes. Sure. I will read the poem again, and I also have here an excerpt from the description of how Rumi started to dance. And another thing, a thought experiment that I came up with. I'll start with the thought experiment, which is try this on for size. Imagine a person who has never seen color their entire life. They get 5 minutes to see color, and they can see color in nature and stuff made by humans in 5 minutes. And then we tell the person, good luck using your tools of recollection. Good luck using your tools of recollection to record your experience for you later on, and for us all common mortals who have never seen color ever, to convey that experience. So this is trying to, like the Flatlanders thought experiment, that helps us understand higher dimensions just by adding the third to the second. We are looking at a bunch of people who are monochromatic in their vision, and suddenly some special person becomes a chromatic vision person for a brief amount of time, and then this person is tasked with conveying the experience and also reminiscing the experience for herself. It won't do it justice. Yeah. Yeah, William James with his conceptual versus perceptual, for sure. He is blamed for me coming up with this, because clearly color is not something that we can transfer from perceptions to concepts at all. We don't know how to do that, even though that we have like 400 years of science and the electromagnetic spectrum really well studied. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Maybe, yeah, maybe the problem is not in the physics side per se, the basic physics side. Yeah, we can have the physics really super described, even simulated in computers and all. Probably we will need to delve into biology way more, in the sense that we figure out what the brain is actually doing with the cosmos. Uh, if at all it is possible, it's probably an intractable problem, because maybe just as enzymes lower the energy barrier to do stuff that we would need harsh acids and high temperatures to do in our digestive system, for instance. In the brain, maybe there are some structures, really specialized structures, that shield uh, certain structures of our brains, or inside the neurons, or inside the glial cells, or whatever, that allow for quantum effects, or quantum computing, or something like that, which kind of outsources to the cosmos the work. Yeah, but we don't know. So, and maybe we are not sure we will ever know. And even if we know, at the level of a single cell, we will never know what the emergent result is of somewhat like thousands of millions of neurons generating this so-called field, or capturing or getting this so-called field from the cosmos at large. So we don't know, and it's really possibly intractable. We can only experience it. But we at least know that particles that are small enough to have substantial quantum effects, they present themselves, at least experimentally, to be extremely sensitive to observation. It's almost like the universe itself, the cosmos itself, has sensory, or is a sensory organ itself, and it kind of, we sense it and it's sensing itself at the same time. It's almost like that Solzhenitsyn quotes. They are lying. We know they are lying. They know that we are lying. We know that they are lying, that we are lying, etc., etc., and they still lie. And it's like the universe is playing a game. It's doing a play. And even if we show that we know that it's being observed, and that we realize that it's reacting to the observation, the universe just doesn't care and continues to play with us, in a sense. It's just the way it is. And so, yeah, having said this, it's really, really weird. Yeah, of course, it's very difficult to pinpoint what this is. Look at what science really is. Science is just another philosophical school in my mind, and we can even characterize it. they're empiricists. They also put some weight on testimony, but it really needs to be high quality testimony. They don't accept any testimony. It needs to have some methodological validation, even if it's amateur astronomers. They really need to show that they did their proper due diligences, and they have these checks and balances to help weed out empirical problems, because this philosophical school is aware of error, the error measurement problems, noise versus signal. They are aware of that. They are also aware that when we experiment something empirically, they try really hard to isolate variables, but still there can be some contamination. And in complex fields like biology, medicine, psychology, sociology, these contaminations are over the charts and very, very, very difficult to isolate. And thus these fields are have way less grounding to progress really exponentially, like physics and mathematics powered fields that are much more easy to isolate experimentally. And also, having said this, they completely, this school, this philosophical school we call science, they completely forego any subjective experiences in their system of epistemology. So their epistemology is completely object oriented, in completely empirical. It's completely materialistic, and so everything that is not that, this philosophical school refuses to do utterly. And so if we want some philosophical school, uh, as we are using this term to kind of look at the like in the Hellenistic age, the Stoics, the Cynics, the Skeptics, the Epicureans. So if you want someone to help you with some naturalistic phenomena, you will probably go to the Epicureans more than to the Skeptics, because the Skeptics will just their business is another, or you probably won't go to the Platonists to help describe what the heck is lightning. You will probably go to Epicurus, who is much more his school's characteristics are much more geared towards at least giving possible explanations, naturalistic explanations for lightning. But if you want to figure out ethics, if you want to figure out politics, if you want to figure out how is peak human being in terms of character, you probably don't want to only involve materialists, because materialists will only describe human as human is in their current definition, like Plato. Man is a aren't we have people who are really interesting idealists, like Viktor Frankl, who is an idealist after Auschwitz and other predicaments. And he this and so this is the discussion is way more broader than
Okay, I don't know what's happening here. I'm going to end this broadcast and just join in the spaces because we're having some audio problems.